Good morning. Thank you for attending. You know, they always save the best for last, right? I've got some housekeeping items. Turn off or set your phones to vibrate. Please complete the session evaluations in the mobile app. We really do need your feedback. And CEU information's available on the table in the back of the room. Or you can ask the room monitor for assistance or visit the speaker ready room in N220E. Scanning badges to confirm attendance for CEU and attendance certificates. Please make sure you have your badge scanned when you come in. And visit the Coverings Lounge in booth 3919 for some more educational opportunities. I'm going to introduce the panel. At the end, I've got Rob Broderick, technical trainer for the National Tile Contractors Association. Rob travels the U.S. holding workshops and educational programs, teaching tile industry standards and methods. Rob is certified as an installer by the Ceramic Tile Education Foundation. He has 30 years experience in the tile industry working with architects, designers, builders, and homeowners. Rob has played a role in thousands of both residential and commercial projects. He earned his Bachelor of Science degree at Missouri State University, served in the Army as a medic, and Rob currently resides in Springfield, Missouri. Next to me, I've got John Namba. John's been in the floor covering industry since 1976. His experience includes installation, certification of hardwood, carpet, resilient ceramic tile, laminate, decorative concrete coatings, and concrete moisture testing. He has experience in retail sales, retail management, and commercial contract sales. His hands-on skills were displayed at the World Floor Covering Association-sponsored Best of the Best installation contest at Surfaces. He was a participant in the Resilient category in 1999 after winning a regional division in 1998. In 2001, at the national competition, he was awarded first place for Best of the Best in the carpet category. He was the Director of Technical Services for the World Floor Covering Association from 2001 to 2006, where he coordinated all aspects of training and education with the Regional Installation Training and Education Program. While there, he created partners in training with the National Wood Flooring Association and Ceramic Tile Education Foundation. In 2006 to 2010, he was Executive Director of the International Certified Floor Coverings Association, CFI. And from 2009 to 2011, President of National Wood Flooring Association Certified Professionals. From 2012 to 2019, he was on the Board of Directors for the National Wood Floor Covering Association. Currently, he's the editorial director for the Floor Covering Installer magazine and actively involved in his business in Salt Lake City, Utah, where he owns and operates a family business doing consulting, inspections, training, installations, and remodeling.
I didn't realize you were going to read all that. Thank you.
You send it, I'm going to read it. Chuck Marlborough is a technical director with the National Stone Institute, formerly the Marble Institute of America, a trade association encompassing over 2,000 members from 50 different countries. Chuck's in his fourth decade of his career in the stone industry with experience in quarrying, fabrication, installation, anchorage design, stone selection, industrial stone applications, laboratory testing, forensics, estimating in both domestic and international sales. Chuck is a voting member of 7 national technical committees, including ASTM C18 on dimensional stone, and just completed 6 years service as the chair. Myself, my name is Jim Whitfield. I'm the Director of Technical Services at MAPE. I've been involved in the flooring industry since the mid-'70s, where I used to install tile. Now involved with many of the trade associations from National Tile Contractors Association Technical Committee, ANSI, ISO, TCNA Handbook, and President of the MMSA Materials and Methods Standards Association. Wow, that's a lot, isn't it? Our time's up. Thank you very much. No, sorry. So today I'm really pleased to see such a strong audience for this subject because I think it's essential to everything that we do as floor covering installers. Ceramic tiles, stone, resilient, and wood floors require one thing, and that's excellent surface prep. Surface prep is the foundation for the finished floor and or wall assembly. You wouldn't feel comfortable living in a house if you thought that the foundation had just barely passed code, would you? It's the same thing. We really want to make sure that we've got good surface prep. And surface prep can also make the installation of the finished flooring much easier. The panel addressed industry-required substrate tolerances for both floors and walls. Some might not be putting their materials on walls as frequently. While the tolerances are different, there's a lot of similarities. I think you'll hear that. Does that mean that design professionals in the construction industry is always referencing the same types of requirements for tolerances and so on? Not even close. And we'll address that a little bit. Some of the big changes or differences between Division 7 and 9 where we operate. Surface prep is essential to making the installation really go well. Without it, in tile you can have lippage. In wood flooring you can have overwood, or really kind of lippage for wood if you might, or gapping for that matter. We just have to make sure that with a good substrate, the finished floor and or wall can go in so much easier. Unfortunately, being a professional floor covering installer, if you start installing your finished materials, it means that you pretty much accept the substrate. And that's not always the case, so it is important they point out issues to the GC and or homeowner for that matter. We're held to a different standard than a DIYer. We're considered a professional. So how we approach our substrate is essential. This panel will expand on standards, expectations, tolerances, the importance of pre-installation meetings, and job site visits. The panel also addresses crafting and creating industry standards, and how we must constantly consider new industry trends and or innovations for that matter, and how it can affect the installer and or applicator. I think a few years ago, a really good example of this was with gauge porcelain tile. All of a sudden, tile installers had to deal with a tile that was anywhere from 5 foot by 10 foot. And as an industry, a lot of the people pulled together, went to one of the tile manufacturers, and we actually installed for a day and a half, and came back and pulled tiles and checked our coverage, made sure out the best procedures that got us the best coverage. And we created standards around that. Because of the need for that standard, and I mean a real need, that standard passed in about 18 months. That is uncommon. It can take standards 10 years, 12 years to pass. And a lot of times there's a very good reason for that. It requires a lot of testing and round-robin testing, and you have to differentiate from other products that are out there. So there's a lot of different reasons. But that's just a good example. And I think gauge porcelain tile was a perfect example. Because of gauge porcelain tile, we have a MAPE, I can't tell you how many floor patches we have and self-levelers. It's probably in the 20s. But we had to create one for walls. Nobody was thinking about prepping the walls and trying to get those level. If you asked an installer how they did it, I'd tell you the odds are very good. They're going to say, we just used our thin set. That's really not the right answer anymore. So, innovation's important, and we need to continue to recognize that and make sure that we try to address it as well as possible. So again, your client can get the best floor and or wall installation. Why am I not moving? There we go. This is an AIA presentation, so it's generic. IDCEC approved as well. All right. So let's talk a little bit about surface or substrate tolerances. Rob, do you mind starting? Let's talk about the tile
Okay,
industry.
well, like Jim said, I travel around the country doing educational programs and workshops, and so I meet a lot of people in the tile industry, and you know, I'm sure most of the people here are pretty thoroughly educated, but maybe not. I'm assuming you probably are if you showed up and came to coverings. But one thing that we always talk about is our responsibility as contractors and what we should look for in that installation, and how if we go over a substrate and we accept it, then we have created some liability for ourselves if that substrate wasn't appropriate. So two of the big standards that we talk about are the standards for flatness. You know, the situation with the tile industry is our tiles just keep getting larger and larger, and the grout joints get smaller and smaller. And when that happens, we need to have a really, really flat substrate to have a good installation. So, and there's I guess the slide, we'll talk towards it. There's a disparity between the way the concrete guys look at flatness and the way the tile guys look at flatness. They use FF numbers and FL numbers, and they use lasers. And of course, when we look at our industry standards, which are found in ANSI and the Tile Council North America Handbook, it says that we use a 10-foot straight edge. And so basically, with the FF numbers, a conventional concrete floor could have a score of maybe 20, and you know, something considered flat with the concrete industry would be like a 35. And if we're trying to reach those standards that we use, the 1/4 inch and 10 and the 1/8 of an inch and 10, you know, it's not going to work with a 35 FF number. So, and actually, one great resource, how many NTCA members do we have in the audience? Okay. All right, the rest of you, we're going to sign you up right after this. I'll tell you about some of those benefits. But we have a great reference manual, and in it there's a terrific chart that kind of shows the relationship of FF numbers with our straight edge and how that reflects floor flatness and how they relate to each other. But basically, it's based on the tile size, the grout joint size, and what the FF number should be. So for some of these larger tiles, you know, an FF number of 60 would be the equivalent of what we would need for a really flat floor. But there's a disparity there, and we need to get paid for that prep. One of the things that we always do is we encourage our members to you know, in their proposals, you know, let's talk about this. Let's put it in our proposals that this estimate doesn't, you know, all surfaces to receive tile must meet this TCNA standard of no deviation of more than a 1/4 of an inch and 10 foot, or additional prep will be required. So if we talk about that up front, that's the ideal situation. No one likes to have a change order at the end. So,
Well, I want to mention too, at the bottom of this slide, I do have a link to a good white paper on the differences between divisions 3 and 9. I mean, it's huge, and that's a really important point. If you get near expansion joints or movement joints or cold joints for that matter in the slab, they can't measure anywhere near those. They can't measure around columns, up against walls. So their requirements are very different than ours. It's all done within the first 72 hours of the pour of concrete. We're coming back there months later sometimes, and of course then we see the curl. So this is very serious and very important. So again, I put a link up there, and also this should be available online to the copy of this presentation.
yeah.
I'll put your.
All right, so yeah, this is what I was talking about here. We've got our straight edge, the same standards that we talked about. So the large format tiles are any tile that has a side that's over 15 inches. And for those, of course, the substrate flatness, the standards are twice as stringent. We need to have no more than an 1/8 of an inch variation in 10 foot. And when I say variation, I mean a hump or a dip. And the other category that we're going to talk about here is all the tiles that are smaller than that. And of course, we can have no more than a 1/4 of an inch deviation in those places. And you know, I travel all over the country, and all I've done my whole life is tile, and I can tell you these kind of surfaces you don't find. You're not going to find walls and floors that meet this. So what that pretty much tells us is everywhere that we're going to install tile, it's going to need some type of prep. And we need to communicate that. And
You want to talk about the ANSI requirements.
Oh yeah, this is good. So, you know, we want to decrease liability. We want you guys to make sure that you're safe. And like I said earlier, if we accept a substrate and that substrate isn't correct and we tile over it, then we kind of own it at that point. And this comes right out of ANSI. Now, not everything about the structure is ours, but if we have anything that's visible, you know, especially this flatness criteria that we talked about, and we go over it and we don't correct that, then we've just taken that responsibility. But this comes right out of ANSI. It's something you guys should be aware of. It says, prior to commencing ceramic tile work, the tile contractor shall inspect surfaces to receive tile and accessories and shall notify the architect, general contractor, or other designated authority in writing of any visually obvious defects or conditions. Now, there's a lot of things that aren't visual. You know, the structural side of that isn't necessarily our responsibility. And if you look in the TCNA handbook underneath those methods, there's a great section in each one of those methods that talks about preparations by other trades. And that kind of separates who's responsible for what. So we're looking for any visual defects, and when we find them, we need to report them to the right people and make sure that they get corrected before we proceed with their installation.
I also want to mention, you know, if you're doing commercial work, typically in the tile and/or flooring section in Part 3, execution, this is a fairly common statement as well, you know, to make sure that you address the general contractor if the conditions aren't suitable. Mm-hmm. So. Chuck, do you want to address marble tolerances?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I just want to mention that when Rob sets up his table to sign the rest of you up as members, I'm going to have a table adjacent to it, and you can sign up as Natural Stone Institute members. And I've got a pen you can use, so we'll take care of that right after the talk. Us stone guys don't mess around with, you know, talking about, you know, size or formats or anything. When we're thin setting stone, we just ask for the 1/8 and 10. As Rob already mentioned, finding a 1/8 and 10 compliant stone from the concrete placement, it's about the same odds as finding a unicorn. We're seeing, you know, more and more of our members are just going ahead with, you know, doing their own floats over the structural slab and you know, trying to get that work into their scope so that they can control it. We have some differences in our stone tolerancing in that we typically use tighter joints. We don't actually, as an association, endorse a tight or hand-butted joint. Even though it is done. But we oftentimes see 1/16 inch joints. In fact, seldom do we see larger than an 1/8 inch joint in an interior. When you're using tight joints like that, we generally provide the stone with a sharp edge. The designers do not like to have the edge of the stone chamfered, because if you chamfer the edge of the stone, then it makes the joint read wider visually. If you have a 16th inch joint with even slight little chamfers on it, all of a sudden it reads like an 1/8. And of course, the designers just want the joints to go away. They don't want to look at them. So that gets us into another issue where we have a more stringent lippage tolerance. Because we're using sharp edged material without a chamfer, we're using tight joints, we have a lippage tolerance of a 32nd of an inch. Practical terms, a 32nd of an inch is roughly the thickness of a plastic credit card. Mine are a little thinner than that because they've been used too many times, but as a practical reference, you can think of that. That sounds incredibly stringent, but it's necessary. I have walked across floors where I have measured the lippage at even less than a 32nd of an inch, and depending on what shoe you're wearing, you catch that sharp edge of the stone, and it's quite a jolt to your stride. So it is necessary. It's attainable with you know, skilled workers, but it's high quality work. It honestly is high quality work. We also look for a little bit more, and then this would be a separate session in itself, but we look for a little bit more control for moisture and in particular vapor. All stones are polymineralic, meaning they get a mix of different minerals in them. And most of them are not going to be an issue, but oftentimes we'll see, in particular in a decorative material, we'll see a vein that's much more vulnerable to vapor transmission than the field fabric of the stone. And so we need to not only control this substrate from a dimension and flatness quality standpoint, but we need to be a little bit more controlled about what other elements and contaminants might be seeping through this whole system that could attack the stone.
You want to talk about deflection? You want to talk about deflection in the case of stone compared to the others?
I didn't realize you had the deflection slide up. We don't like deflection. Stones do not bend well.
Like it.
They do bend, actually. They just don't bend a lot. We have two deflection standards. We allow L over 360 on concrete substrates, but we require half of that, L over 720, in frame substrates. And the reason for that is the frame substrates have a different deflection behavior. They tend to respond in a more linear pattern of deflection across members. And in some cases, what we do to actually improve that floor hurts our case, because we'll sister up some floor trusses because we've got an opening, and all of a sudden that makes that more rigid than the adjacent framing member. And it's that differential deflection that causes us trouble, in addition to the paneletic activity, the deformation of the deck that goes over it. That's why we typically require double layer plywood, because we have trouble with the hinge effect, where you have a single layer system and an area of discontinuity, or a seam for that matter. So we have the two deflection standards, and that is a broad brush way of addressing it, because what cracks a stone, or ceramic for that matter, what cracks it isn't really deflection, it's curvature. And deflection and curvature are not actually the same thing. So deflection on a short span is actually a sharper curvature than the same deflection on a long span. Yet we define the limits in terms of a fraction of the span, because that's the way engineers calculate deflection. So we use their language for it.
Thank you, Chuck. John, will you address some of the requirements for the wood flooring industry, the tolerance, and as well as moisture and so on, like Chuck had addressed too, very well?
Sure. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all here, and I'm surprised at the crowd here. I want to just say thank you. We appreciate you all being here. And you know, we're talking about floor flatness on hard surfaces. When we look at the tile side, the wood side, how many of you here in the audience sell or install both type of surfaces, hardwood and tile and stone? So there's quite a number of you. And one thing, you know, our tolerances on the wood side are different. We have two different ratings. On a mechanically fastened wood subfloor, we're at 1/4 inch in 10 and 3/16 in 6. On a concrete substrate, we're at 3/16 in 10 and 1/8 inch in 6. So our tolerances on the wood side are not very far off. When you're talking only a 1/16 or a 32nd of an inch difference, that's not much. So all of our tolerances are tight. Rod had mentioned going to larger format tiles now. So on the wood side, we're seeing wider planks. What used to be 2 1/4, 3 inch, you know, we used to think 5 inch was wide. We're starting to see 5, 7, 9, 11, 12, 13 inches wide. And if we don't address those flatness tolerances, it has an adverse effect on our industry also. And you had mentioned joints. Your joints on the tile side are independent. We fill those with grout, right? On the wood side, those joints interlock. So if there's any movement on the joints on our side, we get the creaky, squeaky floors. And so that's where we see a lot of our complaints and concerns from our end users. So one thing, being a small business owner, we're based out of Salt Lake City, Utah. We're in a very dry climate, so we have, hardwood, we have tile. We install all these flooring categories. Being a small business owner, we're the salesperson, we're the business owner, so we can make the decisions that we need to right there on the spot. We're selling the job. We're on site installing those jobs. So we have a touch on that job from the beginning to the end. So we can see that. Many of you, the business owner, you may have a sales associate and then that sales associate hires a subcontractor. So there's a lot of disconnecting areas on that substrate preparation. And you hear the conversation of, well, John, how much do we add in for subfloor prep? I can't really throw a number in. So what if we add 50 cents a square foot? It may work, but then again, what if it doesn't work? We're able to control the site because we also do remodeling. So we're a general contractor, so we actually control that site. And so we build that relationship with our homeowners, our clients, and we discuss that subfloor preparation, the requirements for flatness, and where's the value in spending all this money, John, on the front side, because that floor looks flat. I mean, and here's part of our problem is you have flooring contractors, once again we heard it, that are accepting these substrates, and they're using products that aren't designed to flatten these floors. You're seeing thin set. You're seeing, on our side, we see adhesive. We see cardboard being used under the glue down floors. Installers are shimming up with cardboard, gluing over the top of that. Rather than doing a 5-spot on tile, they'll do a 5-spot of wood flooring adhesive. So, our markets are very similar. We go through the same flatness considerations. And also now you're starting to see more wood going up on walls. So those tolerances that we have on the floor apply right directly to the wall, just like the tile and stone industry. So there are a lot of similarities there. And I think, you're starting to see more and more a lot of these retail shops, even some of you in here, you're starting to diversify, going from tile, jumping into the stone, going into the hardwoods. Why? Because a consumer and client is putting all those products in a home, and if you can provide that surface on the floor, they're going to, they just want to deal with one company. They don't want to have to get 3-4 different bids from different subcontractors. They would much rather work with one. Our business philosophy on floor prep is it's open. It has to be open because I'm in business to make money. And if I bid something at, I'm going to guesstimate 50 cents a square foot, it's like, and I'm in the hole on that job, it's like, that makes no business sense, all right? I'm cheating the end user, I'm cheating myself, and if I'm not compensating my installers for doing floor prep, they're going to cheat the system. And that's what we got to get away from. And that's why, the floor flatness tolerances are much tighter now than they used to be. What used to be 2 1/4 inch wood was a little more forgiving. 8-inch by 8-inch tiles with a 1/4 inch grout back then. Remember those days? Well, some of you may not. But yeah, it was much more forgiving. Our tolerances are much tighter now. And I think as an industry, we need to make sure on the front side we address floor prep rather than on the failure side. When you get that call on the backside saying we got some issues here, that's too late to have that conversation because now it's going to cost someone a lot of money. Okay?
John, will you also address some of the moisture issues related to wood flooring? Because I think that's really essential too.
Yes, on our side of the industry, wood being hydroscopic, it's definitely going to be affected by moisture more so than tile. Stone, once again, we have, stone, we have to address the moisture issues also, but, when you look at the tile side, tile is the most forgiving of all our surfaces for moisture. And, we're seeing, this is a non-wood or non-tile, but you're starting to see a lot of these composite products being touted as waterproof that are coming into our market. And they're hitting our trades. They're hitting our tile side of the industry, the stone side of the industry, the wood side of the industry. And, one thing you look at our products, they're all natural. Every one of our products are natural. Clay, stone, wood. You look at that other side of that industry, it's a huge industry. It's taking over. It's really gaining some market share, but it's a man-made product. They're over-marketing it, and once it goes to the landfill, what's happening with it? It's sitting there, okay? It's just sitting there. So with all our products, they're eventually going to degrade at some point in time. So I think that's another, if you want to look at down the road, not necessarily our lifetime, but our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, what are we going to leave them? All right? So on the moisture side of things, kind of got a little sidetracked there, sorry. But on the moisture side of things, it is a huge factor on the wood side. It is a huge factor. Because we're not only affected by the moisture coming from a slab or a wood substrate, we're affected by the ambient conditions. So our temperature and relative humidity on our side is critical. And if we have a substrate that doesn't meet flatness tolerance, we have moisture issues, whether it's too much moisture or too dry of moisture, that all plays into all of our failures that we're seeing on the hardwood side. So not only do we have to deal with that flatness, but we also have to deal with the ambient conditions also.
Thank you. Very good. Now I'd like the panel to talk about, and I believe you mentioned it starting, John, was getting to the job site ahead of time, a pre-installation job site visit, and in order to check out the conditions and have that conversation a little bit more up front as opposed to last minute. Rob, do you want to try to address that?
Well, sure. And I imagine several people in this room have tried to approach their clients with a change order and had some difficulty. That's pretty common. So, the earlier we can have this type of communication and look things over and see what the situation is, the better off we are. If we can, one thing that I think really can help people in those communications is having these industry standards with them when they present their information. Having the TCNA handbook as a guideline and ANSI for our standards. We're all about that, the NTCA, that's what we train about. But once you bring that standard to the individual, this isn't your idea, this isn't their opinion or your opinion, it's actually what the industry says about it. And that can kind of empower you to move forward and get paid for that work, because we need to get paid for it. It's an extra thing that we do. It needs to be done, and we need to be paid for it. So that's generally, that confrontation from the homeowner or the builder and to the tile contractor, that can kind of bridge the gap. And the sooner we do it, the better. That's the moral.
Agreed. John, do you want to mention anything about the wood flooring as far as getting out there ahead of time?
A lot of our installations on all these flooring categories on the hard surface side, we go into a residential, could be even a commercial application. There's carpet on the floor. And I think the industry needs to get a whole bunch of crystal balls, okay? So we set that crystal ball on the counter. And when the homeowner says, my subfloor is flat, why are you charging me all this floor prep? Because you don't see anything going on. The carpet's flat. I don't see any big lumps or humps in the carpet. Remember, carpet's much more forgiving. So, do we look into that, gaze into that crystal ball and say, okay, this is how much floor prep we're going to have? That's why we cannot determine floor prep. when there's an existing floor covering on top of that surface. There is no way. And that's why I think a lot of the retailers, a lot of contractors, they get caught up in that with the consumer because they want that sale. They want to close that sale. So they kind of leave that back door open a little bit, but whatever you tell a consumer on the front side is what they're going to remember on the back side, right? Exactly. So give me a price. Just give me ballpark. Give me that ballpark price. Okay, I'll give you $500. Okay, I don't know if that's going to be the number, but I'll throw you a ballpark number because you just want a number. So it comes down to it. Installers remove all the carpet, the cushion, and they're looking at that floor. John, you're going to need 100 bags of floor patch or self-leveler. I don't think $500 will cover 100 bags of self-leveler, do you? And that's where we get into trouble. Yeah. So that's where we start to take the shortcuts. Well, can we just kind of go 50-50 split it? And maybe just use a bag here, till I hit my 500 mark, because the customer doesn't want to pay anymore, because that's the number they remember. Whatever number you gave them on the front side, and you tell them, this is only a guesstimate. Doesn't matter. That's the number they're going to remember. So that's why we will not throw out a number on the front side of any of our estimates. And I think that's where we have to, as an industry, we have to have that confidence to say, look, we cannot see your substrate underneath this cushion and carpet. So at the time that we take all this out, that's the time we can have a discussion on floor prep. And it may be a little bit, but it may be a lot. Because we cannot see through, we do not have x-ray vision. And today I didn't bring my crystal ball, so I just can't give you an idea, all right?
This picture at the top of the slide is John estimating floor prep. and he did supply that, by the way.
Yeah, I found this on the web, and I thought this is so ideal. How do you estimate floor prep? It's a shot in the dark for a lot of people. So I thought it was a good example.
Bart, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, Jim. I don't know if it's okay. I'm just curious for John, and maybe back to Robert, Chuck. When you get out there, who's responsible for determining the conditions of the moisture concrete? I mean, at the end of the day, flooring contractors aren't, engineers, et cetera. So you got a floor that's got too much moisture. Is that your responsibility on the wood side, or is it the builder's responsibility?
So here's what's happened. Okay, we gave control. We, as an industry, all of us here, each industry, we gave control to the home builder and the general contractor. And now we're trying to gain that control back, addressing flatness issues, addressing moisture issues, and now it's an uphill battle because we let the gates fly wide open. So Pandora's box is open, and now trying to rein everyone in because we're going to, once again, wider planks on our wood side, wider tile, larger format tile. The market's changing, but what happened is we as an industry didn't keep it under rein. And part of that may be due to, subcontractors coming into the market. When it was an employee-based company that had nothing but employees, I think they had tighter reins on that. You were able to educate your employees and work with them and get that proper installation done. But then now we have a different entity that's entered the market, and these are subcontractors. They have a business license. They're not required to have a degree. So you're seeing so many variables now that you didn't see before, and a subcontractor has to make a house payment or a car payment, all right? So what they're going to do is, thin set 5-spot works good for me, cardboard, a little bit more adhesive under the wood works for me. So it is a challenge as an industry. Now we have to, and look at the self-leveling market. Holy smokes. And another thing we let go is the cement finishers. I keep telling my wife we were in the wrong side of this business. we needed to be on the front side because that's where all the money's at. They haven't lost their budget for floor covering yet. So on the front side, I can do whatever I want as a cement finisher. You know why? Because the installer's going to accept that subfloor anyway. It's on their shoulder now, not on mine. So they accepted my 5/8 in 3-foot slab. So they're out of the picture now. And so there's no, it's lopsided. It's really lopsided. So we as an industry are suffering because, on the front side of things that have occurred. I'm taking way too much time. I want to give these two guys some time to talk.
Chuck, do you want to address anything pre-installation that stone industry, like preloading and things like that, I think are important?
We do, in rare instances, yes, we do preload. You probably will only see it in stone, one, because our deflection criteria is much more stringent, and two, because our product is heavy. We also have an issue with, in stone products, we have different tolerancing for the thickness of the material itself. And generally, when you're talking about stone tiles, they will be gauged, and they'll generally be within plus or minus a 32nd, a 1/16th window. Where the floodgates open up is when you get into nominal 20 millimeter, 3/4 inch material, because in the stone industry, that then becomes defined as a dimension stone slab, not a tile. And that's where the thickness tolerance, believe it or not, opens up to plus or minus an 1/8. Now, truthfully, nearly everyone in the world is far better than that. Yet, by industry tolerances, if it is a nominal 20 millimeter thickness, that supplier has plus or minus 3 millimeters, plus or minus an 1/8 of an inch of thickness tolerance. And that's because that person sawing that slab in whatever country doesn't necessarily know how it's going to be used. Now, if it's going to be thin set, obviously that tolerance isn't going to work. If it's going to be anchored veneer, as a lot of 3/4 inch material is, then that tolerance is absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Agreed.
One thing I want to address with the Bart said, he had the question, who's responsible? And here's how the verbiage works. The installer is not responsible to do moisture testing, but the installer is required to make sure that that substrate meets all industry and manufacturer guidelines. So where does that put the installer? I mean, he or she is, trying, at the day of installation, they're out there to work. And so no one in front of them has bothered to take any moisture test if it's required. And so do you delay the job for a minimum of anywhere from a day to several days, depending on if there's moisture mitigation, or do you just go with it? And now so what you're starting to see now on the wood side is you're starting to see adhesive manufacturers marketing these 4-in-1 type products. John, you don't need to check moisture content. All you do is make sure you got 100% coverage of adhesive, and we'll warranty it. Well, when you look at these jobs, I don't care whether it's an adhesive on the wood side or it's a thin set on the tile and stone side. To achieve 100% is really difficult. It's extremely difficult. And so we still, on these 4-in-1 type products that are moisture mitigating adhesives, we still see failures out there. And who's controlling the spread? It's that installer, whether it's thin set, whether it's the flooring, hardwood flooring adhesive.
Let's expand on this a little bit more. I think Rob started to allude to it, getting paid. As it's been mentioned, surface prep isn't something that they commonly expect, but we know that it's commonly needed. You want to talk a little bit about, Rob, getting paid for surface prep using industry standards and the project specifications?
Yeah, just like I mentioned, earlier, that these standards that we have, they're there to support you and help you guys. if you look in the handbook and those guidelines, you can use them to communicate with your customer. There's standards for lippage in there, like was mentioned earlier. Basically, the thickness of a credit card is what's allowable for most of the installations that we're doing nowadays. There's a chart in there. So, when you have those customers, and even the way that the customer inspects the tile, there's actually a viewing distance that they should stay away from the tile. So if you get these customers crawling all over your installation and looking at it very closely, those kind of things are in there to help you. And it's the same way with the substrate prep. When we go to them and we need to get paid to do a job the correct way, we can use that. And like I said earlier, it'll empower you and it'll make the biggest difference, because you're not saying to them, hey, I think your floor's bad, or, this is my opinion. This is what the industry has to say about it. So, and there's been a whole lot of information said here, and it's going to be hard to remember all of that. But if you have those technical manuals, like I said, the TCNA, ANSI, NTCA reference manual, you use those and reference those will help you get paid. That's been my experience. When I would take that to a customer, they understood, hey, this guy knows what he's doing because he's using this technical document, and it just made the road a lot easier.
Yeah, and I think that, one of my points about specifications as well is that commonly they're part of the specification on a commercial project, and so the design professional put them in there for a purpose, and you can use those same standards to your advantage. And I think what's important is that you review those and understand them, because there's a lot of good contractor language in there is what I want to get at. You got a comment?
I was just going to make a comment going back a little bit to what John was saying. I have noticed over the years coming to these conventions that, and people typically, if they're on the installation side, when I go, yeah, I'm an inspector. And I almost audibly detect a little bit of a growl in the background, because we are in a really bad situation, because the rule says the installer is supposed to do X, Y, Z. So when we're out in the field doing an inspection, what's interesting about this is that really the growling shouldn't come from probably almost everybody in this room, because we're all working really hard to follow the rules. The inspector has to read a document that says just exactly what John said. The installer is responsible to make sure that that is prepared, but doesn't mean that he or she has to do it. So, I'm just making a comment here. Maybe we need to be thinking, we probably already are, how do we bridge this gap a little bit better? Because it's a very difficult scenario with this issue that we're talking about, and it's just not fair, the situation between the installers and the inspectors. It's just not fair. We go out, we're looking at documents, well, the rule says this, pal, you didn't meet that. And there's no regard for, dude, you don't know what I had to go through just to get through this process. And it's easy to blame, the installer when there really are probably a lot of them. Well, there are some at least that are really trying to do it right, and even the ones that are trying to, come to conferences like this and listen to discussions like this, to do it properly. There's still a pretty wide gap there, and I'm not sure I know what the solution is. I'm just saying maybe it's something to talk about.
I can add that part of the responsibility for dealing with that rests on our shoulders as industry organizations. And in a lot of ways, we've done a good job of it, but we haven't done a perfect job of it, certainly. That's why when you look at industry associations, whether it's the NTCA or the TCNA or the NSI or whoever is, putting these documents together, those committee members have a very large component of contractor members. And in my own association, we just went through we're wrapping up a very extensive revision of 3 chapters of our design manual. And the final review committee was 6 people. It was 5 contractors and 1 engineer. And it was really interesting to me to see the difference between that's the way it should be versus nobody's that good. You can't do that, you know. And as John was talking about his 100% coverage, our documents used to say 100% coverage on stone tile. Nobody's that good. And it's allowing this inspector, you know, who's a consultant, and consultant was once defined to me as someone who will steal your watch and then charge you to tell you what time it is. But it's allowing that individual, you know, one way to come after a contractor when the contractor probably did very high quality work with very skilled, trained craftspeople, but there's a practical limit to what's attainable. You know, when the job was bid competitively, you know, there's so many hours that you have to get this done. I mean, our documents are still very stringent in tile. We allow voids of 2 square inches. And if you think of a void being generally circular in shape, and you imagine what 2 square inches is, that would be a circle that is 1.6 inches in diameter. And what's significant about that? That's a golf ball. We allow a golf ball sized void.
Anybody else want to comment on?
No, that's exactly right, though. These organizations are looking out for your best interests. It's been real, you know, I've been with the NTCA for 5 years, and getting to go to these meetings and see what's going on, they're constantly thinking about the contractor, thinking about how can we make this industry work where everyone can have successful installations and be profitable. So there's good support there by contractors.
That's a fact. I have to agree with that. We really strongly try to work together as an industry to improve the process and for the contractor as well as our installations in general. Martin?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, John, I need to buy one of your silver or crystal balls, because when you're going to inspect the substrate, at least it's there. Our documents for the tile and stone industry require that we get paid for substrate prep, but general contractors in the commercial world will write into our contracts and sometimes into the specifications that we're responsible for all substrate prep, regardless what that means, when the building hasn't even been built yet. So not only can you not go and look at it because there's carpet on it, there's no concrete been poured. There's been no walls built. So how are we supposed to know how much substrate prep is required? You can't. It's impossible. So for the installers in the room, always look for those clauses in your contracts and do your best to fight to get them removed, or you might have to walk away from the job.
So who put those clauses in?
Contractor.
Huh.
So, you know, one thing, we get involved in a lot of self-leveling projects and large ones, hospitals and so on. And one thing I've seen commonly done, and I say this because I think those of you calling on design professionals and GCs for that matter, you know, consider a tolerance. And what I mean by that is, you know, I've been on projects where as large as hospitals or huge commercial projects where they've got a 1/4 inch of self-leveler built in. And a unit price per bag beyond that. So, point being, if you're calling on design professionals, talk about this. It's essential. And I think it's always assumed for resilient and in some of the other industries, but never for tile in the past because we had smaller materials and we could do some things with mortars. That's not the case anymore. These tiles are huge. It has to be flat. So I'm sorry, I just wanted to kind of mention that. I'm going to wrap up real quickly with, you know, maybe some of the challenges we see today. I'm sorry. Because I think, you know, today we've got everything from material shortages to labor shortages, shortcuts in general, and I kind of want to wrap up with that. So, Chuck, would you like to talk about any of some of the shortcuts we see and challenges we've got?
You know, right now there's shortages of everything. You know, there's shortages of containers to get product shipped overseas. You know, not just within recent times, but for a long time, all of our industries have been battling the shortage of labor and qualified labor. So, at least in a temporary time frame, yeah, we're short of everything, and hopefully some of that gets corrected soon. The labor shortage and training for the trades, that one's going to take a long time to turn around. And there, there's a lot of discussion being done. There's some innovative things done in certain micro regions of the country, but nothing on a scale that's going to solve the problem, for the whole country. Not in the short term.
Yeah. Hey, Rob, do you want to mention, talk a little bit about some of the shortcuts? I think we see one big one there on the left.
Yeah, you can see there, basically,
No surface prep there, probably.
no surface prep at all. Like Jim said earlier, when we had smaller tiles, we could get away with more with the thin sets. But now we've got larger tiles, and we need to prep them the right way. And of course, you see over on the far end there, we've got some spot bonding going on, which is a popular way for people to install tile flat with each other, but it doesn't meet those guidelines of, the 95% mortar coverage that's required for an exterior installation. And of course, it can allow water to get in and back behind the assembly. And most of the country, of course, is in a freeze-thaw cycle, so when that water gets behind there, of course, the freezes and those water molecules expand and remove it. How many of you guys have seen the spot bonding? We could probably show you 1,000 pictures of spot bonding. It's done all over the country. But one thing that's really happened with the industry that I'm kind of proud of is, back in the day, self-leveling was very expensive and thin set mortar was very cheap. And if you look at it now, the self-leveling prices have went way down, but the thin set prices have went up because of the way that they're designed and all the chemistry that they have going on with them. So, there's really no excuse for not using the right products. The right products are, mud, cementitious patch, self-leveling. We don't want to use thin set to fix or prepare surfaces because it's not designed to be used in that way.
And also mention, the tile industry, the standards really promote proper prep and not using mortars and things like that for that. Yeah. And so, I think it's really a good example of trying to include in the standards some things that can help you as a contractor. John, do you want to expand on any shortcuts or shortages?
Well, one thing guaranteed is the new normal is there is no normal. It is out the window right now. You're seeing shortages it's ridiculous where you see the shortages. On the wood side of things, we're seeing the lumber going crazy. We're seeing, I talk to my electricians. They're having to stockpile inventory. Same with my plumbers, and now even in our area, vinyl fencing. There's a shortage of vinyl fencing. It's like, this is insane. It's insanity. And it's, is it going to turn around in 6 months? I don't see it happening in 6 months. I think it's going to be long term. And the labor shortage of qualified, I think you'd mentioned qualified labor. That's all, I think that discussion's been since 1950. So it's an ongoing. And is it going to go away? No. It's not. I don't think it's ever going to go away. Not in my lifetime. And but here's the positive thing, and I think someone mentioned it up here on the panel, is that's what these associations are for. It just amazes me that here we have associations that are contractor-oriented and based, yet we can't get the majority of contractors to join these associations, which are fighting for their rights. I just don't understand that. They think, oh, John, that's $500 a year. I don't know about that.
Did you guys hear that? So meet me afterwards. We'll get you signed up.
And also, Brett, you may want to consider kind of putting a membership stand right next to these guys also, so that way they don't have to walk across the hall. But the associations are doing a great job with the funding that they have available. And they have the flooring contractors, tile, stone, hardwood. They have these contractors in, that's their heart and soul right there. They're trying to provide, better opportunities, better business skills for all these contractors out there. And I think we have to just keep pushing for that. And we can't let all these other entities out, that aren't professionals in our industry dictate to us how our products are going down. We need to finally stand up and make a fight. And that's where we need the associations. We need that membership to be strong. That's my final thought.
I'm going to wrap it up at that. I think this has been an incredibly good discussion. We can't stress it enough. And bringing youth into the industry, things like the Coverings Rockstar Award. What a great tool. Coming to these shows, I'm fortunate enough to meet some of the contractors I've worked with for many, many years. Their sons that are coming into the industry. And I had a conversation at Surfaces. It wasn't the only person attending Surfaces. There was another guy there. But at Surfaces, I had a conversation with a tile contractor and met his son, and he talked to me about the struggle of stepping away and letting his son come up with how to run the business or how to install this installation and asking him in details for how they're going to do it. And he said, I really struggle with not trying to provide my input, but I have to let them take over. I have to let them move forward and grow. So with that, as like I said, thank you very much. We all can't help you enough. Substrate prep is essential. It's critical. And thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.